Okay, with this presentation, we're going to take a look at the rise of Byzantium, paying particular attention to the reign accomplishments of Justinian I during the early years of his reign. When we're talking about Justinian, we are talking about the reconquest of the Western Roman Empire. It's very important to understand that calling this empire the Byzantines, we call them Byzantines. They did not refer to themselves as Byzantines. Remember, Constantine moves the capital to Byzantium, later renamed Constantinople during his reign. They see themselves as Romans. Even during the reign of Justinian, they still call themselves Romans. And so it makes perfect sense that Justinian would want to reconquer basically what he viewed as his Western brothers under foreign occupation. And in many respects he does. He conquers the kingdom of the Ostrogoths, which take over much of the Italian peninsula and surrounding area. He goes to North Africa and conquers territory there against the Vandals, who had set up a North African kingdom in the latest stages of the Western Roman Empire, once Attila the Hun pushes them westward. And he takes and reconquests parts of Spain as well. So how do we get there? Justinian I is not one of the typical late Roman emperors that we remember seeing. He's well experienced, he's got good schooling, he served in court, he's highly educated, he understands politics, he understands how politic. A perfect example of this is that he retains this mutual protection agreement with the Goths until Theodoric's death. So he has an alliance in the West when he starts this reconquest. He continued to solidify the borders against military threats, particularly in the east against the old Persian kingdom. And he goes ahead and, at least for a brief time, conquers the Ostrogoths, which are occupying Italy at the time. It is important to note, and it's typical of most of the areas that were reconquered during Justinian's reign, is that these victories are fleeting. Quickly the Ostrogoths rebel, and they are able to once again reestablish their dominance throughout the Italian peninsula. Even in the face of losing all this territory, Justinian actually decides to try and, for lack of a better term, kidnap the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and return him to Constantinople to try and solve the divide that has been growing in Christianity between East and Western Christianity. Ultimately, however, his actions backfire and they end up causing even a greater rift in the Christian world. Personally, Justinian marries Theodora. She has and we'll discuss this more in class, a colorful background to say the least. She was not held in high regard by many people within the inner circle of the government of the Byzantines. However, Justinian ends up sharing power with her. She rules almost as an empress or co-empress with Justinian. She becomes extremely influential in something we're going to talk about in the next vodcast, the Nika Revolt, actually influencing Justinian. She's interested in theology. It's one of her many passions. There's a lot of images and iconography of religious paintings with the emperor and the empress that come out during this time, which she has an influence on. During the Nike or Nika Revolt, Justinian, and we're going to talk about this revolt in detail later on, but Justinian was actually ready to abandon his own empire. People were upset, they were rebelling, and he was ready to leave. It is Theodora that convinces him to stay and ultimately put down this revolt. When you're talking about Justinian, and you're talking about his wife Theodora as well, there are really two different versions of this couple. There is the version by Justinian's court historian by the name of Procopius, which you're going to read in class. Procopius, during Justinian's reign, has a very different view as compared to after his reign. Now, a lot of historians are debating, well, was he just looking to save his own job, and that's why he wrote positive things during Justinian's reign, or Because ultimately, as we're going to see here, Justinian becomes an unpopular figure. Is he going to just go with the times and paint Justinian and Theodora as very unlikable, negative imagery of these two people to save himself from the rest of the Byzantine Empire and the inner circle of the government? I don't know about you, but I think that would be a great essay question, wouldn't it? Assess the reign of Justinian. Was it a success or not? Belisarius. He is Justinian's loyal but feared general. He wins more battles in this reconquest than any other Roman in history. His wife was unfaithful, ultimately had her put to death. When we're talking about, these three individuals together, the reconquest of the Western Roman Empire was largely a success in the short term. However, there are going to be very important long-term consequences, and you need to understand these consequences. First off, these conquests cost money. So Justinian is going to have to tax the people of the Byzantine Empire in order to afford this massive war machine. Also, Justinian thinks that by reconquering the West, he's going to open it up to trade, which is ultimately, in the long term, going to benefit the Byzantine Empire. However, this does not happen. Like I said, his success in the West is short term. He does not have the long-term time to go ahead and set up these trade networks. You also have to let's put it into historical context here. The Western Roman Empire hasn't really functioned in at least 100 years since the beginning of Justinian's reign. As a result, a lot of the infrastructure in the West has eroded. Trade has really ceased to exist on any sort of large, massive scale, at least like we saw during the, say, Pax Romana in the Western Roman Empire. As a result, when Justinian conquers the Western Roman Empire, what he conquers basically are small-scale agricultural settlements that have little trade. Trade was actually very dangerous. Even if you could have these old Roman roads, many of them had deteriorated. They weren't properly maintained by the local populations, particularly in the latter days of the Western Roman Empire. There also, even if they were functional, and in many areas they still were at this time, you had to deal with Germanic tribes or any other group that could attack you along these trade routes. It was dangerous. It was much safer to stay at home. This is ultimately going to be how we see feudalism form in Western Europe, something that we're going to talk about in a future unit. So, yes, he's successful militarily. Belisarius certainly helps him out in that regard, but ultimately, in the long term, it's going to cause a lot of problems. Financially, it was done at a great cost. Justinian becomes in many respects, an unpopular figure as a result. And as a result of him becoming unpopular, that brings us to the Nike or Nika revolt. Now, at the Hippodrome, the massive chariot race building that Justinian didn't build, it was already there. There were basically two teams, the blues and the greens. People were divided, and even while they're at these sporting events, they almost become areas where you could voice political concerns. Ultimately, at the Hippodrome that day, the entire crowd forgot these differences between the blues and the greens and focused their hostility almost solely on Justinian and Theodora. They wanted them out. They wanted to get them out of power. There was rioting, and they just went to open rebellion. I mean, it would be like, Redskins and Cowboys are playing, and then all of a sudden they just join forces against somebody else. I mean, it's almost unheard of. Justinian reacts to this, and he thinks it's over for him. He decides he's going to leave and abandon and move out of this empire before they can get them. It is his wife Theodora that convinces him to go ahead and bear down and put down this rebellion, and they do. They bring in soldiers and they massacre anybody that is in this open rebellion. So, in many ways, this revolt can be seen as a failure for Justinian's reign. I mean, he has his people in open revolt against him. However, he is able to put it down, and he does remain in power. His reunification of the Roman Empire continues. This vision that he has of this united Rome continues in Persia. He makes peace accords and he hammers out trade agreements with them. Ancient Silk Road, Han Dynasty, still important. In North Africa, he takes the area from the Vandals as well. Along with Justinian's pursuit of reconquering the Western Roman Empire, another is his public work projects like art and architecture that you see right here in this slide. This is the most famous image of Justinian that we have. It is a Byzantine mosaic with Justinian in the center. You notice around his head you have the crown, of course, but you also have this halo, and he's holding a bowl. So what does it all mean? Well, if you look to his left, he's got the high priest. The emperor was technically in charge of the Greek Orthodox Christian Church, but the person that ran it was one of the what were called patriarchs of Constantinople, but they still worked for the emperor. Over here on his far right, you have the military, and in the middle, you've got the bowl. Basically, what this image is saying here, guys, is that Justinian is in charge of everything. He is in charge of the military strength, the reconquest of the West. He is in charge of the religion, the Greek Orthodox Church, and the Patriarch of Constantinople. And with this bowl that he's, holding here, he is also in charge of the economics. He brings the food, the fruit to Constantinople. Ultimately, the finances, the money. Which brings us to this last here, a little bit on reunification. He conquers Naples and Rome. He's welcomed by them. Ultimately, Belisarius becomes king, and he gives this power to Justinian. He is his trusted advisor. But once again, this victory is fleeting. Okay, he's able to establish this. He's not able to keep it. Now, for a time, what we see develop is the Byzantines during Justinian's reign. They become what is known as the shield of Europe. They are the gatekeepers, the protectors of the classic Greco-Roman texts, all of these ideas that many oftentimes get lost in the West. Maybe not entirely, but at least big chunks. But they become the defenders of groups that rise up from the Middle East, any areas that attack from the east, like your Huns, any groups coming up from northern Africa. They almost act as a shield of Europe, protecting these Europeans who, honestly, if the Byzantines weren't there, would have been open to invasion by a lot of other people. These areas over here are disorganized, they are not united, and they could not put up a sustained fight against some of these other groups, like the Byzantines could, who were prospering at the time. However, as we see over time, here's the Byzantine Empire, all this area here, during the reign of Justinian, and you see later on, this is a long time from now, but this is where the Byzantine Empire is. After the Byzantines are unable to hold on to these reconquered areas in Western Europe, you see them starting to form early nation states. You see places that we still have today, like England, Ireland, Scotland, France, the Holy Roman Empire, which largely comprised of German states, Poland, Russia, these areas. They come about because ultimately the Byzantine Empire, with the end of the reign of Justinian, is in retreat. And then ultimately, by, late 1400s, we no longer have a Byzantine Empire. It is taken over by invading Ottoman Turks. So with this presentation, we took a look at some of the foreign affairs of Justinian and the inner circle that he has. Next up in part 2, we're going to take a look at his domestic policies. Thanks for listening. See ya.